The skinniest dog Mike Anderson had ever seen, approached with the caution of someone who knew that kindness often came with a price. Rain fell mercilessly in Centennial Park, soaking them both as Mike sat motionless on the bench where Elizabeth had once promised him forever. 43 days since the funeral, and still he came here, letting Nashville's autumn showers mask his tears. The German shepherd stopped 10 feet away, ribs protruding like accusations beneath its matted fur. When Mike shifted slightly, the dog flinched, revealing a network of scars crisscrossing its emaciated frame. A rusted chain fragment still hung from its neck. Their eyes met, hollow, haunted mirrors of each other. Mike extended his half-eaten sandwich, hand trembling. The dog inched forward, desperation briefly overcoming fear. Two broken souls under the same relentless sky, both waiting for a pain that never seemed to end. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Mike Anderson's modest one-story house sat on the eastern edge of Nashville, a place that once echoed with Elizabeth's laughter but now stood as silent as her grave. At 38, the former Army Ranger found himself alone, his days measured by medication schedules and the phantom pains of both physical and emotional wounds from his 3 tours in Afghanistan. The flag case on the mantel held fewer memories than the empty side of his bed. Elizabeth's battle with cancer had lasted 18 months, longer than doctors expected, but briefer than their 15 years of marriage warranted. The medical bills arrived with cruel regularity, each one a paper reminder of his failure to save her, despite selling their savings, his truck, and eventually taking loans against the house Elizabeth had loved. All for treatments that bought time, but not a future. The German shepherd, later to be called Shadow, wore his own history on his broken body. Beyond the obvious malnutrition that hollowed his flanks and sharpened his spine to a ridge of vertebrae, deeper stories were etched across his skin. Cigarette burns peppered his ears. A jagged scar ran from shoulder to hip, poorly healed without medical attention. One ear stood permanently half-folded from what Dr. Reynolds would later confirm was repeated trauma. Yet his amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed at odds with his battered frame, watching and assessing with cautious awareness. The neighborhood had once been solidly middle class, but economic downturns had left their mark in foreclosure signs and deferred maintenance. The Warren County Animal Shelter where Sarah Williams worked was facing its 3rd budget cut in 2 years, operating on donations and the fierce determination of its skeleton staff. 3 blocks away, James Miller's pet shop displayed "Everything Must Go" signs that had become semi-permanent fixtures in his windows, much like the worry lines on his 68-year-old face. Eleanor Whitman had lived in the blue house adjacent to Mike's for 43 years. Widowed for the last 12, she watched the neighborhood from her porch rocker, with the particular attention of someone whose own children called only on birthdays and Christmas. She'd noted Mike's clockwork visits to the cemetery every Tuesday, the way he politely declined all invitations, how the lights in his house rarely changed position as he sat motionless through evenings. The community faced its own wounds: economic uncertainty, aging residents, young families moving to more affordable outskirts. Into this landscape of quiet desperation came a starving dog with a rusted chain and a man who had stopped looking for reasons to continue. Mike broke off a piece of his soggy turkey sandwich, tossing it halfway between them. The dog waited, watching Mike's hands rather than the food, anticipating a trick or a stone. Only when Mike looked away did the dog inch forward, snatching the morsel with delicate precision before retreating to a safe distance. Mike continued this ritual until the sandwich was gone, each piece bringing the animal slightly closer. "That's all I've got," Mike said finally, showing empty hands. The dog sat, its posture strangely dignified despite its condition. When Mike stood to leave, the dog maintained its distance, but followed, a silent shadow 20 paces behind him, through Centennial Park's winding paths. "Go on, get," Mike said at the park exit, waving his arm. The German Shepherd stopped, head lowering slightly, but remained watching as Mike crossed the street. 3 blocks later, Mike glanced back to find the dog still trailing him, maintaining that exact same cautious distance. By the 5th block, the Nashville sky darkened prematurely as thunderclouds gathered overhead. The first fat raindrops fell as Mike turned onto his street. At his driveway, Mike made a more determined effort. "I said go. Go find someone else." His voice cracked with an emotion he hadn't anticipated. The dog flinched at his tone but didn't retreat, instead sitting at the sidewalk's edge as though it had reached some invisible boundary it wouldn't cross without permission. Mike went inside, shutting the door firmly behind him. Through the living room window, he watched the rain intensify into a downpour that rendered the dog a dark smudge against the glistening pavement. He drew the curtains. That night, the storm intensified into one of those southern tempests that rattled windows and split tree branches. Mike lay awake, Elizabeth's absence a physical ache beside him. Twice he approached the window, and twice he saw the German Shepherd, still sitting in the same spot, head lowered against the onslaught, trembling visibly but unmoving. "Not my problem," he muttered, swallowing another sleeping pill. Morning arrived with lingering drizzle and the quiet after-storm clarity that made the air seem washed clean. Mike opened his front door to retrieve the newspaper and found Eleanor Whitman on his porch, umbrella in one hand and a plastic container in the other. "Your visitor's still here," she said by way of greeting, nodding toward the sidewalk where the German Shepherd remained, now lying down, its body making a dark semicircle on the wet concrete. "Poor thing stayed all night through that terrible storm. I tried to coax him over to my porch, but he wouldn't leave his post." She handed Mike the container. "Some leftover meatloaf. I thought maybe he'd take it from you." Mike accepted the container reluctantly. "I can't keep a dog, Eleanor." "Keep a dog." Her faded blue eyes held his gaze steadily. "Didn't say anything about keeping him, just said he might be hungry." After Eleanor left, Mike approached the dog with the container. The animal raised its head, revealing mud-caked fur plastered against an even more skeletal frame than yesterday. It made no move toward the food, even when Mike set the container down and stepped back. "You've got to eat," Mike said, irritation masking concern. The dog's attention shifted beyond Mike to the open door behind him. Something in its gaze, longing, desperation, or simple animal exhaustion, made Mike's chest tighten uncomfortably. "Fine. Just until the rain stops completely." Mike gestured toward the house. The dog rose shakily, approaching with head lowered, each step deliberate as though expecting to be punished for accepting the invitation. Inside, the German Shepherd maintained a careful distance, assessing the layout with alert eyes that belied its physical condition. It didn't explore or sniff furniture, behavior Mike vaguely remembered from childhood pets, but instead found the corner farthest from Mike and settled there, facing the room, watching. When Mike placed the meatloaf on the kitchen floor, the dog didn't approach until Mike stepped into the living room. Even then, it ate with startling gentleness, taking small, careful bites rather than the ravenous gulping Mike expected. Later, as Mike attempted to examine the dog more closely, he noticed the animal's methodical movements, the way it kept the same distance between them no matter how Mike moved around the room, close enough to observe but far enough to escape if needed. When their eyes met directly, The dog held his gaze with unsettling understanding. As afternoon arrived with renewed rainfall, Mike approached the dog with a damp towel. The animal tensed, but allowed Mike within arm's reach for the first time. Under matted fur, Mike's fingers found fevered skin and the heat of infection around the deeper wounds. "You need a vet," Mike whispered, a commitment he hadn't intended to make. The dog's eyes closed briefly, a surrender of sorts, and something long dormant shifted painfully in Mike's chest. The knock came shortly before noon. Mike opened the door to find a young woman in a Warren County Animal Services jacket, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral despite the rain beating on her glasses. "Mr. Anderson? I'm Sarah Williams from Animal Services. A neighbor reported a stray German Shepherd. I understand it might be on your property now." Before Mike could respond, Eleanor appeared on the walkway behind Sarah. "I called," she admitted without apology. "That poor creature needs medical attention, Michael. I thought they could help." Sarah's assessment was quick and methodical. The dog remained in his corner, allowing her approach with the wariness of one accustomed to strangers bringing pain. As she noted each wound and scar, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "This level of abuse," she murmured, photographing the chain marks around the dog's neck. She straightened, facing Mike. "I should take him to our facility immediately." "For treatment?" Mike asked. Sarah's hesitation told him everything before she spoke. "Our resources are extremely limited. We're mandated to hold strays for 72 hours, but given his condition and the expense of treatment—" She trailed off. "You'd euthanize him," Mike stated flatly. "We operate at 138% capacity, Mr. Anderson. Without an adopter willing to cover medical expenses or evidence to pursue animal cruelty charges against an owner," she sighed, removing her glasses, "I wish I had better options." Eleanor made a soft, distressed sound from the doorway. The dog, seeming to understand the conversation's gravity, rose shakily and moved closer to Mike's side. "I know a vet who might help," Sarah offered, her voice softening. "Dr. Reynolds runs a clinic on Madison Street. She sometimes works with rescue cases pro bono." 2 hours later, Mike found himself in a cramped examination room while Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, methodically catalogued the German Shepherd's injuries. Multiple fractures, evidence of cigarette burns, malnutrition, systematic abuse over a prolonged period, she reported, her clinical tone belied by gentle hands. However, no microchip or identifying tags. Likely escaped rather than being surrendered or officially rescued. "Will he recover?" Mike asked. Dr. Reynolds met his eyes directly. "Physically? With proper care, yes. The deeper wounds are harder to heal." She administered antibiotics and cleaned the infected areas. "He'll need medication, proper nutrition, follow-up visits. Are you prepared for that commitment, Mr. Anderson?" Mike hesitated, unprepared for how quickly this stray dog had become his responsibility. "I don't—" "He trusts you," Dr. Reynolds interrupted. "That's significant, given his history." On the examination table, the dog watched Mike with that same unnerving intelligence, as if waiting for his decision. "Michael Anderson," Sarah repeated his name suddenly, her clipboard forgotten. "You served with Jason Williams, didn't you? 3rd Rangers, Eastern Afghanistan?" Mike stiffened. "How do you—" "Jason was my brother." Her voice caught slightly. "He wrote about you. Said you were the best man he'd ever known." The examination room fell silent, except for the dog's labored breathing. "I didn't know Jason had a sister," Mike said finally. Sarah nodded. He saved your life. Took a bullet meant for you. Yes. The single word carried the weight of memories Mike spent most days trying to forget. Something shifted in Sarah's expression. I'll help however I can. With the dog, I mean. That evening, Mike brought the dog home with medications, special food, and the weight of a new obligation he hadn't sought. Sarah had provided basic supplies and promised to delay filing her report as long as possible, buying them time. As dusk settled, a man walked past Mike's house, briefly pausing at the sidewalk. Though unremarkable in appearance, something in his posture triggered an immediate reaction from the German shepherd. The dog flattened against the floor, trembling violently, a high keening sound escaping his throat. "Hey, it's okay," Mike said awkwardly, attempting comfort. The dog remained rigid with terror until the man continued down the street. Mike named him Shadow that night for the way he moved silently through the house, always watching, always alert. The name seemed to fit the dog's spectral presence. Sleep came fitfully for Mike as it had since Elizabeth's death, since Afghanistan, since a lifetime of accumulated losses. The nightmare arrived with familiar precision, the ambush, Jason's body, Elizabeth's hospital room blurring together into a cacophony of beeping monitors and gunfire. Mike woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom smell of cordite heavy in his nostrils. But something was different. Shadow stood beside the bed, one paw tentatively resting on the mattress, amber eyes fixed on Mike's face. When Mike's breathing steadied, Shadow gently laid his head on the edge of the bed, maintaining eye contact. "It's okay," Mike whispered, uncertain who he was reassuring. Shadow remained there until Mike drifted back to sleep, a sentinel against dreams. The next morning brought a moment of discovery. Searching for Shadow's medication, Mike found a small box of Elizabeth's belongings he hadn't yet faced sorting. A printed photograph slipped free. Elizabeth at the Warren County Animal Shelter, smiling weakly despite her illness, thin arm around a dog just out of frame. Written on the back in her familiar handwriting, "I've found your guardian angel, my love, for after I'm gone." Mike stared at the partial image, heart pounding. Before he could search further, Shadow's bark alerted him to someone outside. New posters lined the street telephone poles. Bold letters proclaimed "Missing Dog" above a grainy photo of a healthier Shadow. At the bottom, "Substantial reward. Contact Carter Wilson," followed by a phone number. Mike's stomach clenched as he watched Shadow trembling behind the curtains, gaze fixed on the posters with unmistakable terror. Days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mike administered Shadow's antibiotics each morning, holding the pills in peanut butter, while the dog delicately accepted his medicine with growing trust. They walked at dawn when fewer people crowded the sidewalks, Shadow startling at sudden movements but gradually allowing shorter distances between them. Mike found himself rising with purpose for the first time since the funeral. Shadow needed food, needed medicine, needed the careful cleaning of wounds still seeping despite Dr. Reynolds' care. "He's responding well," Sarah observed during her unofficial checkup a week later. She'd brought additional medications and dog food, waving away Mike's attempt to reimburse her. "The fever's gone, and he's putting weight on that back leg properly now." "He still won't let me touch his head," Mike admitted. Sarah nodded. "Some wounds take longer. Jason—" She stopped herself. "My brother used to say that trust isn't about erasing the past. It's about believing there might be a different future." That night, the nightmares returned with renewed intensity. Mike thrashed awake to the sound of helicopter rotors and distant explosions, only to find Shadow pressing against his side, a solid warmth anchoring him to reality. The dog's amber eyes reflected the moonlight filtering through the blinds, watchful and steady. Without conscious decision, Mike placed his hand on Shadow's back, feeling the rise and fall of the dog's breathing. Something in that simple rhythm broke through the disorientation, pulling Mike back from the precipice of memory. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. Shadow's tail thumped once against the mattress. By the third week, they settled into familiar patterns. Shadow remained alert to Mike's moods, appearing silently whenever the 1,000-yard stare took hold or memories ambushed unwary moments. The dog's presence created a buffer between Mike and the abyss he'd been circling since Elizabeth's death. In return, Mike found himself talking to Shadow, hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness, words he'd never spoken aloud tumbling free in the privacy of their shared space. "I couldn't save her," Mike confessed one evening, Elizabeth's photograph in his hands. Shadow rested his chin on Mike's knee, listening with solemn attention. "All that training, 2 wars survived, and I couldn't do anything but watch her die." Shadow pressed closer, offering simple presence where words would have fallen short. The physical changes were easiest to track. Shadow's ribs gradually disappeared beneath healthier muscle and flesh. His coat, properly nourished and regularly brushed, developed a glossy sheen that caught sunlight. The infected wounds closed, though scars remained, pale lines mapping past suffering across his body. Mike noticed his own transformation more slowly, sleeping through the night, eating regular meals, venturing beyond his property for more than obligatory errands. "You're looking better," Eleanor commented from her porch as Mike and Shadow returned from their morning walk. "Both of you." She'd become a regular part of their routine, offering treats for Shadow and coffee for Mike, her conversation carefully calibrated to require minimal response while providing human connection Mike hadn't realized he needed. Sometimes she shared stories of her late husband Thomas, speaking of loss with the perspective of 12 years' distance. "The missing doesn't ever stop completely," she told Mike one morning, "but eventually it makes room for other things too." The wider community entered their orbit gradually. James Miller from the struggling pet shop recognized Shadow during a walk and approached cautiously, respecting the dog's wariness. "German shepherds are special animals," he said, kneeling at a distance Shadow deemed acceptable. "Loyal beyond measure once they choose their person." He smiled at Mike. "Looks like he's chosen well." Despite his business troubles, James insisted on providing specialty food at cost, explaining, "My sergeant saved me after Vietnam. Chocolate lab who'd failed police training. Best therapist I ever had. Whenever you need anything, you come see me." Dr. Reynolds scheduled follow-up examinations at her clinic after hours, refusing payment. "Consider it professional curiosity," she deflected when Mike protested. "I've never seen such remarkable recovery physically and behaviorally." Sarah visited regularly, her initial professional interest evolving into genuine investment in Shadow's progress. During one such visit, she finally shared the full story. "Jason wrote me letters about everyone in his unit," she explained, showing Mike a weathered photograph of her brother. "The last one arrived 3 days after we got news of his death. He wrote about you, how you saved 4 men during an ambush before getting hit yourself, how he couldn't let you die because the world needed more men like you." Mike stared at the familiar face in the photograph, memories surfacing with unexpected clarity. "He pushed me down, took the shot meant for me." Sarah nodded. "He made a choice, just like Elizabeth did every day she fought to stay with you. She met his eyes directly. Choices matter, Mike. Jason's choice gave you more time. What matters is what you do with it. That conversation lingered as Mike sorted through more of Elizabeth's belongings, a task he'd avoided for months. Among medical bills and sympathy cards, he found Elizabeth's journal, opening to an entry dated 3 months before her death. Visited the shelter again today. The German shepherd still there, so afraid yet watching everyone with such intelligence. Volunteer says he was rescued from terrible abuse but escapes every enclosure they put him in. Something in his eyes reminds me of Mike after the nightmares. That same hypervigilance, same wounded soul beneath the scars. When I'm gone, he'll need someone who understands that kind of pain. Maybe they could heal each other. Mike closed the journal, pieces connecting. The partial photograph. Elizabeth's cryptic words about finding a guardian angel. Sarah working at the same shelter Elizabeth had visited. Coincidences too perfect to be accidental. But healing came with practical complications. The medical bills from Elizabeth's treatment arrived with merciless regularity, each one a reminder of treatments that had extended her life but drained their finances. The mortgage payment fell into delinquency. The cost of Shadow's medications strained an already precarious budget. Mike found himself at the pawn shop with his grandfather's watch, the last valuable he'd withheld from selling during Elizabeth's illness. The transaction brought temporary relief. Mortgage paid, dog food purchased, electricity remained on, but each such measure only delayed the inevitable financial reckoning. There are programs for veterans, Sarah suggested when she noticed the sparse furnishings, items gradually disappearing from Mike's house. Benefits you might qualify for. Mike shook his head. Others need it more. That's not how it works, she countered. Accepting help isn't weakness, Mike. It's acknowledging you're part of something larger than yourself. The first direct confrontation with Carter Wilson occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. Mike had just returned from visiting Elizabeth's grave, a ritual Shadow now accompanied him for, sitting quietly beside the headstone while Mike talked to his wife. A sedan pulled alongside them halfway home, window rolling down to reveal a man in his early 40s, expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. "That's my dog," he stated without preamble. Shadow immediately pressed against Mike's leg, trembling violently. "He doesn't seem to think so," Mike replied, noting the man's manicured appearance, the contrast between his polished exterior and Shadow's reaction. "Name's Carter Wilson." The man removed his sunglasses, revealing cold eyes. "That dog cost me $1,200 from a specialized breeder. I've got papers proving ownership." "I found him starving and abused," Mike said, struggling to keep his voice level. "Whatever papers you have don't justify that." Something flickered across Carter's face. Anger, perhaps embarrassment. Animals need discipline. He was willful, destructive. Mike felt Shadow trembling against him. Looks like discipline and abuse got confused somewhere. Carter's expression hardened. "I don't really care what you think. The law's clear on property rights. I'll be filing a formal claim." He reached into his jacket, producing a business card. "Save us both trouble and call when you're ready to return my property." Mike left the card on the sidewalk, continuing home with Shadow pressed against his side. That evening, he called Sarah. "Unfortunately, he's not wrong about the law," she confirmed after Mike explained the encounter. "Pets are considered property in Tennessee. If he has legitimate purchase documentation and no formal charges were ever filed for animal abuse, he has a legal claim." "He hurt Shadow," Mike said, watching the dog curled tightly in his corner, still unsettled hours after the encounter. "I believe you. but proving it would require documentation we don't have. The shelter never officially processed Shadow since he escaped before intake. So I just hand him back to be abused again? Sarah's silence spoke volumes. The following days brought increasing tension. More missing dog posters appeared, now offering a $2,000 reward. Carter's sedan drove slowly past Mike's house several times daily. Shadow refused to enter the yard alone, hypervigilant during their increasingly restricted walks. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. "Something's happened," she observed, watching Shadow scan the street continuously from Mike's porch. Mike explained the situation, surprised by the intensity of Eleanor's reaction. "That man," she said, voice shaking slightly. "I've seen him before, months ago, walking a German shepherd, this German shepherd, on Maple Street." Her fingers twisted her wedding band anxiously. "The dog dropped the ball they were playing with. I saw him kick the dog so hard it fell. When it didn't get up immediately, he dragged it by the collar, kicking it again." "You witnessed the abuse?" Mike asked. Eleanor's eyes lowered. "I should have reported it. I told myself it wasn't my business." Her voice strengthened. "But I'm reporting it now. I'll testify if needed." Word spread through the neighborhood's informal networks. James arrived with extra supplements to strengthen Shadow's recovery. "Building a case requires a healthy dog showing improvement," he explained. "Document everything with photographs." Dr. Reynolds provided formal medical records detailing Shadow's injuries. "Consistent with systematic abuse," she noted officially. "Not accidental or one-time trauma." Sarah connected Mike with Richard Donnelly, a local attorney who took the case pro bono after meeting Shadow. "I've handled animal custody disputes before," he explained. "They're not easy, but not impossible either." "What are our chances?" Mike asked during their consultation. Richard's expression remained carefully neutral. "Carter Wilson comes from money and influence. His father was a state judge. He's never faced consequences for much of anything in his life." "That doesn't answer my question." "Legally, his claim is strong. Morally, ours is stronger. Sometimes that's enough." Richard gathered his notes. "The immediate concern is preventing him from simply taking Shadow while the case proceeds. I'm filing for a temporary protective order." Despite these efforts, Carter's pressure intensified. He approached Mike outside the grocery store, his initial businesslike demeanor replaced with barely contained anger. "This could get expensive for you," he warned. "I've got resources you can't match." "Why does this matter so much?" Mike asked. "You can buy another dog." Something flashed in Carter's eyes, not just anger but something deeper, more wounded. "He's mine. I decide when things end, not the other way around." He straightened his already immaculate jacket. "Everyone leaves eventually, Anderson, unless you make sure they can't." The comment haunted Mike, offering a glimpse into motivations more complex than simple ownership. He shared it with Sarah during her next visit. "That's disturbing," she observed. "Controlling relationships with animals often mirror deeper patterns." "He wears a wedding ring but always comes alone," Mike noted. "Never mentions family." Sarah considered this. Might be worth looking deeper into his background. Meanwhile, Shadow continued his remarkable progress. He now slept on Mike's bed, rather than guarding from the floor. He accepted gentle head scratches, though he still flinched at sudden movements near his face. On their morning walks, he carried his head higher, occasionally forgetting vigilance long enough to investigate interesting scents or watch squirrels with typical canine interest. Most significant was his response to Mike's PTSD episodes. Shadow developed an uncanny ability to sense approaching flashbacks before Mike himself recognized the symptoms. The dog would press against Mike's side or place his head on Mike's knee, the physical contact creating an anchor to the present. What once required medication now often yielded to Shadow's intuitive intervention. Dr. Reynolds observed this interaction during a home visit. "This is specialized behavior," she noted with professional interest. "The kind service dogs receive months of training to perfect." "He figured it out himself," Mike said. "Or someone taught him," Dr. Reynolds suggested thoughtfully. Mike remembered Elizabeth's journal entry about visiting Shadow repeatedly at the shelter. Had she recognized this potential? Had she somehow begun the training herself during those visits? The financial situation reached crisis point in the 6th week. The final notice on the mortgage arrived, threatening foreclosure within 30 days. Medical bills covered the kitchen table in stacks organized by urgency. Mike's military pension covered barely half his monthly expenses. "I might need to sell the house," he admitted to Eleanor during their morning coffee. "Downsize to something manageable." Eleanor's weathered hands closed around her mug. "Thomas and I bought our house for $22,000 in 1975. Can you imagine? Now they say it's worth 15 times that. But what good does that do me? Too much house for one old woman, but where would I go?" Her comment sparked an unexpected idea. That evening, Mike researched housing options, making calculations on the back of an envelope. The next morning, he approached Eleanor with a tentative proposal. "What if we shared expenses? I could rent your spare room, help with maintenance. You'd have company and security. I'd have affordable housing." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "And Shadow?" "Comes with me, of course." She nodded slowly. "Thomas always said good neighbors are worth more than gold. Let me think about it." As practical matters developed, so did the legal situation. Richard filed the protective order, temporarily preventing Carter from claiming Shadow while the ownership dispute proceeded. Carter responded by hiring Preston Blackwell, a prominent attorney known for aggressive litigation. "He's pushing for an expedited hearing," Richard warned during a phone call, "trying to overwhelm us with legal maneuvering before we can build our case." "What do we need?" "More witnesses to the abuse, medical experts, character witnesses for both you and Wilson." Richard paused. "And money for filing fees, expert testimony, court costs. This won't be cheap, Mike." The community responded with unexpected solidarity. James organized a fundraiser at his pet shop, offering nail trimmings and basic grooming with proceeds supporting Shadow's legal fund. Dr. Reynolds convinced colleagues to provide expert testimony at reduced rates. Sarah started a social media campaign with Shadow's before and after photos, drawing attention from local animal welfare advocates. Most surprising was Eleanor's contribution. She not only accepted Mike's housing proposal, but expanded it. "I'm establishing a foundation," she announced one morning. "The Thomas Whitman Animal Welfare Foundation, using some of the money that's just sitting in accounts. Our first project will be supporting Shadow's case and others like it." When Mike expressed astonishment, Eleanor smiled. Thomas loved animals. Never could walk past a stray without bringing it home. This would make him happy. The hearing date was set for exactly 72 days after Shadow first appeared in Centennial Park, a lifetime measured in healing scars, quieter nights, and gradual trust. Shadow now weighed 78 pounds, his coat gleaming, his movements confident, except when Carter's sedan drove past. Mike found himself sleeping through most nights, the crushing weight of grief not gone, but somehow balanced by new purpose. The day before the hearing, Mike sat with Shadow on the porch, watching sunset paint Nashville's skyline in amber and gold. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he promised softly, "I won't let him hurt you again." Shadow rested his head on Mike's knee. eyes holding that same intelligent understanding that had first connected them in the rain. Mike realized with sudden clarity that this animal had accomplished what no well-meaning friend, counselor, or doctor had managed since Elizabeth's death. He had made Mike care about tomorrow. The Davidson County Courthouse loomed imposingly against the October sky, its limestone facade weathered by a century of Nashville storms and human dramas. Mike straightened his only tie, purchased for Elizabeth's funeral, while Shadow pressed anxiously against his leg, sensing the day's significance. Richard Donnelly waited on the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand, expression carefully neutral. "Remember," Richard advised as they approached, "this is primarily about property law, not emotion. Judge Harriet Collins is fair but strictly by the book. Carter's attorney will paint this as a simple theft of valuable property. Our job is to reframe the narrative." The courtroom filled quickly, dividing like ancient rival tribes. Behind Mike sat Eleanor, Dr. Reynolds, Sarah, James, and a dozen neighbors. Some Mike barely knew. The opposite side held Carter Wilson, immaculate in a tailored suit, flanked by Preston Blackwell and several well-dressed associates. More surprising were the scattered supporters behind them. Members of Carter's country club, business associates, even Pastor Douglas from First Presbyterian, all lending silent legitimacy to Carter's claim. Shadow, permitted in the courtroom by special arrangement, huddled beneath the defendant's table, pressing against Mike's legs, trembling whenever Carter's voice carried across the room. Judge Collins, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents before her with methodical precision before addressing the court. This case presents as a straightforward property dispute, but clearly carries additional considerations. I'll hear opening statements, beginning with the plaintiff. Preston Blackwell rose with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this case, while emotionally charged, remains fundamentally simple. My client, Carter Wilson, purchased this purebred German Shepherd from Blackstone Kennels for $200 3 years ago. We've submitted registration papers, veterinary records, and purchase documentation. The animal escaped Mr. Wilson's property approximately 4 months ago and was subsequently taken in by the defendant, who has refused all reasonable requests for the animal's return. Blackwell gestured toward Carter, who maintained an expression of dignified concern. Mr. Wilson has suffered the loss of a valuable pet, endured considerable expense in his search efforts, and seeks nothing more than the return of his rightful property. While we sympathize with Mr. Anderson's attachment to the animal, the law regarding personal property is unambiguous. Richard rose next, his approach more measured. Your Honor, we don't dispute that Mr. Wilson once legally owned this dog. What we dispute is whether that ownership remains valid given substantial evidence of severe animal abuse. He distributed photographs documenting Shadow's condition when found, alongside Dr. Reynolds' medical assessment. Tennessee law recognizes that animal ownership carries responsibilities. When those responsibilities are severely violated through abuse, the ownership rights become questionable. This isn't merely about property. It's about preventing further harm to a sentient being and recognizing the rehabilitation and bond formed during recovery. Judge Collins reviewed the photographs with a slight tightening around her mouth. These injuries could have occurred after the animal escaped, Mr. Donnelly. We have witness testimony stating otherwise, Your Honor. The proceedings unfolded with meticulous legal choreography. Carter testified first, presenting the narrative of a devoted owner whose beloved pet had unfortunately escaped. Rex was always high-spirited, he explained, using the name on Shadow's registration papers, sometimes destructive when left alone, which necessitated secure containment. Any responsible owner understands that proper discipline is sometimes required. "And the injuries documented by Dr. Reynolds?" Richard asked during cross-examination. Carter's expression remained controlled. "As you've noted, Rex was missing for weeks before Mr. Anderson found him. I can't account for what happened during that time. Perhaps he was hit by a car or attacked by other animals." "Convenient," Richard noted, earning a warning glance from Judge Collins. Eleanor testified next, her voice quavering initially but strengthening as she described witnessing Carter kicking Shadow repeatedly on Maple Street months before Shadow's escape. "The poor creature yelped so terribly," she recounted. "The man, Mr. Wilson, looked around to see if anyone was watching, then dragged the dog to his car." "Did you report this incident, Mrs. Whitman?" Preston Blackwell asked during cross-examination. Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly. "No. I told myself it wasn't my business. I've regretted that decision every day since." Blackwell smiled sympathetically. "Perhaps because it didn't actually happen. Or perhaps you've confused my client with someone else. At 72, memory can be—" "Objection," Richard interrupted, badgering the witness. "Sustained," Judge Collins agreed, but the damage was done. Eleanor's testimony weakened by the implication of age-related confusion. Dr. Reynolds provided expert testimony next, her clinical precision lending weight to the abuse allegations. These injuries are consistent with systematic, intentional harm over an extended period. The pattern of scarring, particularly around the neck and hindquarters, indicates repeated trauma with various implements. The fractured ribs in various stages of healing suggest multiple incidents, not a single accident. Preston Blackwell's cross-examination focused on technicalities. Could these injuries have occurred during the period the dog was missing? Some of the more recent wounds, perhaps, Dr. Reynolds acknowledged. But the older scars, the improperly healed fractures, those occurred over months or years. But you can't definitively connect these injuries to my client? Not without having examined the dog while in Mr. Wilson's possession. The courtroom dynamic shifted when James Miller testified, his Vietnam veteran's cap placed carefully beside him on the stand. "I've worked with animals for 47 years, he stated. "Seen plenty come through my shop, including abused ones. Animals don't forget abuse, but they can learn to trust again. That dog," he pointed to Shadow still huddled under Mike's table, "shows classic fear response whenever Mr. Wilson is present. That's not coincidence or misplaced training. That's memory." Sarah's testimony brought the community dimension into focus. The social media campaign, Save Shadow, had gathered over 20,000 signatures in under 2 weeks. "The public response has been overwhelming," she explained, presenting the petition. "People recognize that this case represents something larger than a single dog. It's about whether we as a community value rehabilitation and healing over technical property rights." Preston Blackwell objected repeatedly during her testimony, questioning its relevance to the legal matter at hand. Judge Collins allowed it with limited scope, but her expression suggested uncertainty about its legal weight. The most difficult testimony came from Mike himself, forced to articulate a bond formed without words. "Shadow came to me when we both had nothing," he explained, voice steady despite his discomfort with public speaking. "He was starving, injured, terrified. He paused, searching for words. "I was in a similar state, just less visible." "And you believe this justifies keeping property that legally belongs to someone else?" Blackwell asked sharply. Mike looked directly at Carter Wilson. "I believe ownership comes with responsibility. I believe Shadow deserves better than returning to abuse." "Objection," Blackwell interrupted. "The defendant continues making unsubstantiated accusations of abuse." "The medical evidence," Mike began. "The medical evidence shows injuries without definitively proving their source," Judge Collins interjected. "Please restrict your testimony to factual observations, Mr. Anderson." As the hearing progressed into its fourth hour, Shadow's anxiety increased visibly. When Carter approached the witness stand, passing near the defense table, Shadow pressed himself against the floor, a low whine escaping despite his obvious effort to remain silent. The involuntary reaction spoke more eloquently than any testimony. Judge Collins noticed. "Mr. Donnelly, perhaps the animal should wait outside." "Your Honor," Richard responded, "the dog's reaction to Mr. Wilson is directly relevant to our case. This instinctive fear response demonstrates the relationship history." Carter's testimony continued, his composed exterior occasionally slipping when pressed about specific incidents. "I don't recall the event Mrs. Whitman described," he stated firmly. "As for the dog's current reaction to me, Mr. Anderson has clearly trained antipathy during these months of wrongful possession." By late afternoon, both sides had presented their cases. Judge Collins reviewed her notes before addressing the courtroom. "This case presents a conflict between clear property law and ethical considerations regarding animal welfare. While I'm sympathetic to concerns about the animal's well-being, the documentation of legal ownership is unambiguous." She adjusted her glasses, expression stern. "Without definitive proof connecting the documented injuries to Mr. Wilson, proof that meets legal standards, not merely suggestion or coincidence, I'm constrained by property law precedent." Mike felt a hollow opening in his chest as he recognized the direction of her ruling. Beside him, Richard shifted papers, preparing final arguments, but the legal machinery seemed inexorably moving toward Carter's victory. During the brief recess before closing arguments, Mike made his decision. He approached Carter in the courthouse hallway, Shadow remaining with Eleanor inside. "Name your price," Mike said without preamble. Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me?" "For Shadow. Whatever you want. I'll pay it." A faint smile touched Carter's mouth. "You don't have what I want, Anderson." "I've got $3,000 in savings," Mike continued, desperation edging his voice. "I'll sell my truck, whatever else I can liquidate." "This isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" "You don't love him. You hurt him. Why fight so hard to get him back?" Something flickered behind Carter's eyes, a momentary glimpse of something wounded and raw before the composed mask returned. "Because he's mine. Because things don't get to leave unless I say so." The naked possessiveness in those words chilled Mike. "He's not a thing. He's alive. He feels pain." "We all feel pain," Carter replied, straightening his tie. "Some of us learn to give it instead of just taking it." Before Mike could respond, Preston Blackwell approached, ending the conversation with a pointed reminder about unauthorized contact with his client. When court resumed, Richard delivered an impassioned closing argument emphasizing the moral dimension of the case. "Your Honor, the law exists to protect the vulnerable, not to enable their suffering. While property statutes apply to animals, we ask the court to consider the higher ethical standard implied in Tennessee's animal cruelty laws. Returning Shadow to a situation where abuse is likely contradicts the very foundation of justice." Preston Blackwell's closing remained coldly pragmatic. "Emotional appeals aside, this remains a straightforward matter of property law. Mr. Wilson has provided comprehensive documentation of ownership. The defendant has provided circumstantial evidence and speculation. The standard for overriding established property rights must be higher than sympathy or attachment." Judge Collins listened attentively to both arguments before announcing, I'll review the evidence and deliver my ruling tomorrow morning at 9. Her gaze swept the courtroom, lingering briefly on Shadow still pressed against Mike's leg. This case requires balancing competing legal principles with significant consequences either way. I don't take that responsibility lightly. As the courtroom emptied, Richard gathered their materials with practiced efficiency. She's considering all angles, which is good, not rushing to judgment. But, Mike asked, recognizing the hesitation. But property law is clear, and judges are bound by precedent. Without definitive proof of abuse linked directly to Carter. He left the sentence unfinished. Outside the courthouse, supporters from both sides lingered. Eleanor clutched Mike's arm. Whatever happens, you did everything possible. It might not be enough, Mike replied, watching Carter emerge, surrounded by his entourage. The two men's eyes met briefly across the courthouse steps. In that moment, Mike recognized something familiar in Carter's expression, not cruelty, but a profound emptiness that sought filling through power over others. The same emptiness Mike had carried since Afghanistan, since Elizabeth's death. The difference lay only in how they'd responded to it. Sarah approached, her expression determined despite the day's setbacks. It's not over. The judge saw Shadow's reaction. She's thinking, not just following the obvious legal path. And if she rules against us, Mike asked, then we appeal. We keep fighting. Sarah's hand touched his shoulder briefly. Some battles are worth losing everything for. Mike nodded, feeling Shadow pressing against his leg, trusting despite a lifetime of evidence that trust led to pain. Some things were indeed worth losing everything for. He'd finally found one. Judge Collins delivered her ruling with the dispassionate clarity of law untroubled by emotion. While the court acknowledges concerns regarding the animal's welfare, documentation of legal ownership is unambiguous. The plaintiff, Carter Wilson, has provided sufficient evidence establishing his ownership rights. The defendant's concerns, while compelling from a moral perspective, do not meet the legal threshold required to override established property rights. Mike heard the remaining words as if underwater. 24 hours to surrender Shadow, $5,000 fine for wrongful detention of property, court costs assigned to the defendant. Richard's hand gripped his shoulder in silent support. Across the aisle, Preston Blackwell accepted congratulations from Carter's associates, while Carter himself merely watched Mike with the satisfied expression of a man accustomed to victories. Outside, rain fell in a gentle, persistent drizzle, washing away chalk drawings children had made on the courthouse sidewalk during the previous day's wait. Hashash, Save Shadow, rendered in bright blues and yellows, dissolved into pastel rivers flowing toward storm drains. We'll appeal, Richard promised, umbrella tilted against the rain. Animal custody law is evolving. This could eventually become a precedent-setting case. Eventually doesn't help Shadow now, Mike replied, watching the dog press against his leg, unaware that their time together had been measured and found insufficient by the mechanisms of justice. Sarah arrived at Mike's house that afternoon, her expression grim. The shelter received its final funding notice. We're closing at the end of the month. You're losing your job? Mike asked, temporarily distracted from his own crisis. Along with 6 others. More importantly, we're losing placement options for 73 animals. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture Mike now recognized as frustration. The timing couldn't be worse. I could have arranged an underground transport for Shadow if we still had operational connections. Underground transport? Sarah's smile held no humor. You think you're the first person to face returning an animal to an abuser? There's a network, unofficial, obviously, that sometimes helps in cases like this. But with the shelter closing, Shadow watched their conversation from his corner, ears alert, body curled tight as though trying to make himself smaller. Since returning from court, he'd refused food, water, even his favorite treats from Eleanor. When Mike reached for him, Shadow had accepted the touch but remained tense, vigilant, as if understanding that threat had once again found them. By evening, Mike found himself considering options he'd previously dismissed as unthinkable. "I could leave," he told Eleanor during their nightly check-in. "Just pack up, take Shadow, go somewhere Carter couldn't find us." Eleanor set her teacup down carefully. "And live how? As a fugitive over a property dispute? That's not a life for either of you. Better than sending Shadow back to certain abuse." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but running solves nothing. Courage isn't just for battlefields, Michael." The conversation ended abruptly when Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, face paling alarmingly. "Eleanor?" Mike moved quickly to her side. "Just indigestion," she insisted, though her breathing remained shallow. The paramedics arrived within 12 minutes, their assessment more concerning than Eleanor's dismissals. "Possible cardiac event," the younger EMT informed Mike. "We're taking her to Baptist Hospital for evaluation." "I'm fine," Eleanor protested weakly from the gurney. "Foolishness." Mike followed the ambulance in his truck, Shadow rigid with anxiety in the passenger seat. The emergency room's controlled chaos swallowed Eleanor immediately, leaving Mike in the sterile waiting area with only clipboard forms and vending machine coffee for company. Dr. Patricia Reynolds found him there 3 hours later. "I heard about Eleanor," she explained, settling beside him. "Hospital grapevine. She's stabilized, mild heart attack, but she's responding well to treatment." "This is my fault," Mike said, staring at the untouched coffee grown cold in his hands. "The stress of the case, everything with Shadow." "Eleanor Whitman has lived 72 years making her own choices," Dr. Reynolds interrupted firmly. "Give her the dignity of her decisions, instead of assuming responsibility that isn't yours." Mike nodded, accepting the correction, if not entirely believing it. "They've given me until noon tomorrow to surrender Shadow." Dr. Reynolds' expression tightened. "I've seen how courts handle these cases. Sometimes the law protects the wrong party. So I just hand him over, knowing what happens next?" She had no answer for that. Mike left Shadow with Dr. Reynolds briefly while visiting Eleanor, finding her pale but alert in the hospital bed, oxygen tubes beneath her nose. "Don't you dare blame yourself," she said immediately, voice weaker but spirit unchanged. "Thomas had his first heart attack at 62. Whitman hearts are temperamental. Still, the stress is part of living a life that matters." She gestured him closer. "Listen carefully, Michael. Whatever you decide about Shadow, make it something you can live with afterward. Regrets are poor companions in old age." Midnight found Mike at Centennial Park, Shadow beside him, the same bench where their paths had first crossed, now slick with October rain. The park stood empty, street lamps casting yellow pools across wet pavement and autumn leaves. Mike had wandered here without conscious direction, seeking some solution in the place where everything had begun. From the bench, the pedestrian bridge spanning the Cumberland River rose like a pale ghost against the city skyline. Mike found himself walking toward it, Shadow following without hesitation despite the hour and weather. The bridge stood empty, offering solitude and the hypnotic sight of dark water flowing beneath. Mike leaned against the railing midway across, rain soaking through his jacket. The rushing water 40 feet below matched the roaring in his mind, memories of Elizabeth's final days, Afghanistan's choking dust, the judge's impassive ruling. Shadow pressed against his leg, offering the silent comfort that had become their shared language. "I can't let him take you," Mike whispered, running a hand over Shadow's damp fur. "But I don't see a way out that doesn't make everything worse." "There isn't one." Mike turned sharply to find Carter Wilson standing 15 feet away, collar turned up against the rain, expression unreadable in the dim bridge lighting. "Following me now?" Mike asked, instinctively moving to place himself between Carter and Shadow. Carter shrugged. "Figured you might try something desperate. Thought we should talk before you do something that can't be undone." Shadow trembled violently, pressing himself against the bridge railing as far from Carter as possible while remaining near Mike. "Look at him," Mike said, gesturing toward Shadow's terror. "Does this look like an animal that should be returned to you? He's a dog, Anderson. They're driven by instinct and training, not reason. You've spent months teaching him to fear me. I didn't teach him anything. You did that yourself." Carter stepped closer, prompting Shadow to emit a low whine. "You think you know me based on what? An old woman's testimony? Some scars that could have come from anywhere?" His voice remained controlled, reasonable. "Everyone's so quick to judge without understanding." "I understand enough." "Do you?" Carter's laugh held no humor. "Let me guess. Military background, lost someone recently, looking for something to save because you couldn't save them. Am I close?" Mike's silence was answer enough. "You're projecting," Carter continued, taking another step forward. "Making this dog into some surrogate for your own damage. It's pathetic." "And what's your excuse?" Mike countered. "What damage are you working through by hurting animals that depend on you?" Something dangerous flickered across Carter's expression. "You know nothing about me." "I know you're afraid of that dog," Mike said quietly. "Not physically. You're afraid of what he represents. Something you couldn't control, something that escaped despite your best efforts to break it." Carter moved with unexpected speed, closing the distance between them, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think a few months with a stray makes you some kind of savior? You're nothing. Tomorrow at noon, that dog returns to me, and everything returns to its proper order." Shadow, who had been cowering throughout the confrontation, suddenly straightened. Despite his terror, he moved forward, placing himself between Mike and Carter, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Carter's expression shifted from anger to surprise. "Even now, he defends you." "Because that's who he is," Mike said, "not what you tried to make him." For a moment something like uncertainty crossed Carter's face as he looked at Shadow, not cowering now, but standing his ground despite visible trembling. Then his expression hardened again. "Noon tomorrow, Anderson. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He turned and walked away, footsteps echoing on the wet bridge planking, until he disappeared into the darkness beyond. Shadow maintained his protective stance until Carter's presence faded completely, then collapsed against Mike's leg, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Mike knelt beside him, face pressed into the dog's damp fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the inadequacy of the words burning in his throat. They remained on the bridge as midnight became early morning, rain falling steadily around them, the city lights reflecting in fractured patterns on the dark river below. Each passing minute brought them closer to noon, to separation, to the undoing of healing barely begun. In the eastern sky, the first faint lightning announced dawn's approach, not yet visible, but promising inevitability. Mike straightened, decision crystallizing with the growing light. "Come on," he said to Shadow, turning away from the bridge railing. "We need to see someone." Shadow followed without hesitation, trust unconditional, despite circumstances suggesting its futility. Together they walked through the sleeping city, each step bringing them closer to noon, to choices that couldn't be unmade, to consequences that would reshape everything that followed. Dawn found Mike on Carter Wilson's doorstep, Shadow tense but steady beside him. The Georgian-style home stood immaculate within its manicured grounds, presenting the carefully orchestrated facade of success that Mike now recognized as Carter's defining characteristic. "You're early," Carter observed, opening the door in pristine business attire despite the hour. His eyes narrowed at Mike's rain-soaked appearance. "Court specified noon." "I'm not here about the court order," Mike replied, exhaustion evident in his voice. "I need you to understand something before this ends." Carter hesitated, then gestured them inside with practiced hospitality that never reached his eyes. Shadow entered reluctantly, body low to the ground, trembling visibly, but remaining at Mike's side. The house's interior matched its owner, expensively furnished, meticulously arranged, and devoid of personal touches. No family photographs adorned the walls, no evidence of shared lives occupied the surfaces. The perfection felt clinical rather than comfortable. "What exactly am I supposed to understand?" Carter asked, maintaining careful distance from Shadow. Mike met his gaze directly. "That running never works. That whatever you're trying to escape by controlling everything around you, it follows you anyway." Something flickered behind Carter's composed expression. "Spare me the amateur psychology." "I recognize it because I've tried it myself," Mike continued. "Afghanistan, 3 tours. You come home thinking if you just maintain perfect control, the chaos can't touch you again. This has nothing to do with—" "Then there's a trigger," Mike interrupted. "Something breaks through. For me, it was Elizabeth's cancer. No matter how disciplined I was, how perfectly I planned, I couldn't control it, couldn't save her." Carter's jaw tightened. "I didn't invite you here for confessions." "What was your trigger, Carter? What couldn't you control?" "Get out." Carter's voice remained level, but a dangerous edge had entered it. "Was it your father? Eleanor mentioned he was a judge. Powerful men often—" "Don't you dare talk about my father." Carter's careful composure fractured slightly. "You know nothing about him." Mike nodded slowly. "The wallet you always carry. There's a picture inside, isn't there? Not your father, though." Carter's hand moved unconsciously to his jacket pocket. "Your mother," Mike guessed. "The one person who didn't stay." The change was instantaneous. Carter's controlled demeanor crumbling like a facade revealing the damaged structure beneath. "Get out. Now." Shadow whined softly, pressing against Mike's leg. "I came to tell you that I understand," Mike said quietly. "Not to excuse what you've done to Shadow, but to recognize that damaged people damage others. It's a cycle, one you can break." Carter's laugh held no humor. "With therapy and self-improvement? Save it for someone who hasn't heard it all before." "Then why do you still carry her picture? Part of you must believe in the possibility of something better." Carter moved suddenly, crossing to an ornate desk and removing a crystal decanter. He poured amber liquid with shaking hands. "My father was a respected judge," he said after drinking deeply. "Pillar of the community, devoted family man." The sarcasm on the last phrase cut like glass. Behind closed doors he was— Carter paused, visibly struggling. "Creative in his discipline. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a circular scar pattern along his forearm. Cigar burns, his favorite when I was young. Later, he preferred methods that didn't leave visible marks. Mike remained silent, recognition passing between them, the shared language of those who've endured systematic cruelty. My mother left when I was 11, Carter continued, refilling his glass. Packed while he was at work, kissed me goodbye, promised to come back for me soon. His expression hardened. 29 years ago next month, still waiting. Shadow had settled slightly, watching Carter with alert but less fearful attention. So yes, I have a temper, Carter acknowledged. Yes, I've hurt the dog when he disobeyed, when he destroyed things, when he tried to escape. His voice dropped. Just like my father hurt me when I tried the same. You became what you hated most, Mike said quietly. Carter's hand tightened around the glass. Don't presume to know me after one convenient confession. I don't need to know more. I've lived it differently, but recognized it last night on the bridge. The emptiness, the need to control, the fear. Carter's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Fear? That you'll become your father completely. That there's no other path possible. Ooh. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the grandfather clock marking the quarter hour. Finally, Carter spoke, his voice barely audible. I thought having the dog back would prove something, that I could make things end differently this time. It doesn't work that way, Mike said. Trust me, I've tried. Carter looked at Shadow, who maintained his cautious distance. He never trusted me, even before. He didn't complete the thought. Animals know. They see through the pretense. They also forgive, Mike replied, when given reason to. Carter's laugh held a brittle edge. Some things shouldn't be forgiven. Probably not, Mike agreed. But continuing the cycle guarantees nothing changes. Carter set his glass down carefully. What exactly are you asking for, Anderson? Let Shadow stay with me, legally, permanently. Break one cycle that you can control. Carter studied him for a long moment. And I'm supposed to believe this act of magnanimity will somehow redeem me? No, Mike said simply. But it might be a start. The tension between them was interrupted by Mike's phone ringing, Sarah's number appearing on the screen. Mike answered with trepidation, expecting news about Eleanor. Mike? Sarah's voice came through breathlessly. Where are you? I've been calling all night. At Carter's house, he replied, watching Carter's expression shift to surprise. Wait. What? Never mind. Listen, I found something. Going through shelter records for the closure, I discovered... She stopped, gathering herself. Elizabeth was at our shelter multiple times in her final months. I know. I found journal entries mentioning visits. It's more than visits, Mike. She paid the adoption fee for Shadow. Well, we called him Ranger then. The paperwork was complete except for final signatures and home verification. Mike's heart stuttered. She was going to adopt him? For you, Sarah confirmed. The notes say, service companion for husband with PTSD. She was arranging it as a surprise. Then she ran out of time, Mike finished, a fresh wave of grief washing over him. There's more, Sarah continued. I found a video message she recorded for the adoption process. I'm sending it now. Mike's phone pinged with an incoming file. With unsteady hands, he opened it, Elizabeth's face appearing on screen. gaunt from treatment but eyes bright with purpose. "Hi, sweetheart," her recorded voice began, causing Mike's breath to catch. "If you're watching this, then Sarah has introduced you to Ranger. He's special, Mike. Somehow he knows when the nurses are having bad days, when patients need comfort. The shelter staff says he was terribly abused but still chooses to trust. Reminds me of someone else I love." Her smile, though weakened by illness, remained the one that had first captured Mike's heart 15 years earlier. "I know you'll say you don't need anyone after I'm gone, that you can manage alone, but please accept this gift. Let him help you like you've always helped others. You both deserve a second chance." The video ended, leaving Mike staring at a blank screen, tears falling freely. Shadow pressed against him, offering the silent comfort that had become their language. Carter had watched the video from across the room, his own expression unreadable. Finally, he moved to his desk, removing papers from a drawer. "The court documents transferring ownership," he explained, placing them on the coffee table. "My lawyer filed them yesterday." Mike looked up, confusion breaking through grief. "I'm releasing all claims to the dog," Carter clarified. "Regardless of whether you sign your agreement, I'm withdrawing mine." "Why?" Carter's gaze shifted to Shadow. "Because some cycles need to break. Like you said." He paused. "And because he was never really mine, not in the ways that matter." Mike stared at the documents, disbelief warring with cautious hope. "Just like that?" "Nothing about this is just like that," Carter replied. "But I'm tired of becoming my father one decision at a time." He signed the papers, sliding them toward Mike. "Take them. It's done." As Mike left Carter's house, legal ownership of Shadow secured in an unexpected turn of events, his phone rang again. This time it was Richard Donnelly. "I was about to call you," Mike began. "Save it," Richard interrupted. "Something extraordinary is happening. You need to get to the courthouse." "The courthouse? Why?" "Just come. And bring Shadow." The scene that greeted Mike outside the Davidson County Courthouse defied comprehension. Hundreds of people filled the plaza, many holding handmade signs bearing Shadow's image and #SaveShadow hashtags. Local news crews captured the gathering from strategic positions. James Miller stood at the center, organizing the crowd with unexpected authority. "Mike!" Eleanor called, waving from a wheelchair positioned near the courthouse steps, Dr. Reynolds standing protectively beside her. "You should be in the hospital," Mike admonished, hurrying to her side. "And miss this? Not a chance." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "The community came together. It's been happening all night." James approached, beaming. "Started with a few customers from the shop sharing your story online. Sarah's social media campaign caught fire. Then Channel 4 picked it up." He gestured to the crowd. "These folks aren't just here for Shadow, though he's the catalyst. They're standing against animal abuse, against legal systems that protect property rights over welfare." Richard Donnelly joined them, adjusting his tie. "Judge Collins has agreed to an emergency hearing. Apparently, she received over 500 emails overnight. The optics of this case shifted dramatically." "That won't be necessary," Mike said, producing the signed documents from Carter. Richard examined them with professional skepticism before breaking into a rare smile. "Well, I'll be damned. He surrendered all claims?" "People can surprise you," Mike replied, watching Shadow navigate the crowd with newfound confidence, accepting gentle pats from supporters. Eleanor's foundation announcement transformed the gathering from protest to celebration. Standing shakily from her wheelchair despite Dr. Reynolds' objections, she addressed the crowd through a borrowed megaphone. For 43 years, my husband Thomas and I lived in this community. When he passed, I thought my purpose had ended too. Today marks the beginning of the Thomas Whitman Animal Welfare Foundation, initially funded with $1 million from our estate. The crowd erupted in cheers as Eleanor continued, "Our first initiative will establish Nashville's first no-kill animal sanctuary and rehabilitation center for abused animals, providing a permanent solution to the shelter closing crisis." Sarah, standing nearby, wiped tears openly. "This means jobs for our entire staff, homes for all 73 animals, and expanded services we've only dreamed about." "All because of one skinny stray dog," James observed, scratching Shadow behind the ears. The foundation announcement prompted an unexpected second surprise. James Miller stepped forward, voice cracking with emotion as he pledged his struggling pet shop building as the foundation's headquarters. "Been losing money for years anyway," he explained to Mike privately. "This gives the old place purpose again. Besides, the foundation's agreed to keep me on as manager. First steady paycheck in 3 years. Most surprising was the arrival of Carter Wilson, standing uncomfortably at the gathering's edge. When he approached Mike, the crowd parted, conversations hushing expectantly. "I'm not staying," Carter clarified immediately. "Just wanted to tell you I've made arrangements with Ms. Whitman's foundation. Monthly contributions, anonymously." Mike nodded, recognizing the significance of the gesture. "It's a start." "Yes," Carter agreed quietly. "A start." As the impromptu celebration continued, Shadow suddenly froze, attention fixed on a specific point near the courthouse entrance. Mike followed his gaze to spot Sarah standing with a small cardboard box. "Elizabeth recorded training videos for the shelter volunteers," Sarah explained as Mike approached. "Simple commands, reward techniques. She worked with Shadow specifically during her visits." She removed a tennis ball from the box. "She documented everything meticulously. Try this." Mike looked at Shadow questioningly. "Find it?" he said tentatively. Shadow's ears perked immediately. Sarah tossed the ball into the bushes. Without hesitation, Shadow located it, returning it directly to Mike's hand. "Good boy, guard position," Mike tried, using a phrase he'd never uttered before. Shadow immediately moved to Mike's left side, sitting at attention, eyes alert. Elizabeth taught him service dog commands tailored specifically for PTSD episodes, Sarah explained, holding up a notebook filled with Elizabeth's handwriting. "Every command, every technique, customized for you." Mike knelt beside Shadow, overwhelmed by the realization that Elizabeth's final gift had been more deliberate, more precisely crafted than he'd imagined. She hadn't simply chosen a dog. She'd prepared this specific dog to support Mike through the grief she knew was coming. "She said you saved her every day for 15 years, Sarah said softly. "This was her way of continuing to save you after she was gone." Shadow pressed against Mike's side, no longer trembling, no longer fearful. A guardian angel delivered through unlikely circumstances, connection transcending loss, second chances manifesting in unexpected forms. "Elizabeth always did think of everything," Mike whispered, burying his face in Shadow's fur as past and future reconciled in a moment of perfect understanding. 1 year later, Centennial Park bloomed with spring's fresh promise. Mike Anderson sat on the same bench where he'd first encountered a starving German shepherd, though little else remained unchanged. Shadow, now 85 pounds of glossy coat and confident posture, sat attentively beside him as a group of fellow veterans gathered around. "PTSD doesn't discriminate," Mike explained to the circle of men and women, some recently returned from deployment, others carrying decades-old wounds. It doesn't care about rank or experience. What matters is finding anchors that bring you back to the present. Shadow moved among the group with practiced ease, instinctively approaching a young Marine whose hands had begun trembling. The dog pressed gently against the man's leg, amber eyes maintaining contact until the trembling subsided. "That's what I call real-time intervention," Mike continued, nodding toward Shadow. "Sometimes your anchor has 4 legs instead of 2. The Nashville Veterans Outreach Program had begun 6 months earlier, with 3 participants in Mike's living room. Today, 37 veterans attended regular sessions in the community center, built on the grounds of what had once been the Warren County Animal Shelter, now expanded into the Thomas Whitman Animal Rehabilitation Center. Eleanor watched from her customary bench, surrounded by a half-dozen seniors from her weekly Silver Paws gathering. The program paired elderly residents with companion animals, addressing isolation while providing homes for older shelter pets often overlooked for adoption. "Thomas would have loved all this," she told the newcomers, gesturing toward the bustling grounds where construction continued on additional rehabilitation facilities. "He always said animals see past our wrinkles to the young hearts beneath." At 73, Eleanor had embraced her unexpected role as foundation chairperson with remarkable vigor. Her cardiac event had become a catalyst, rather than a limitation, each day filled with purpose that her doctors credited with her remarkable recovery. Inside the main building, formerly James Miller's struggling pet shop, the transformation was complete. Bright open spaces replaced crowded aisles, with adoption counseling rooms, a veterinary clinic overseen by Dr. Reynolds, and a community gathering space where training classes and educational programs ran daily. James himself directed operations with newfound energy, his Vietnam veteran's cap now accompanied by a Foundation polo shirt. "Never expected a second career at 69, he often joked. But turns out there's no mandatory retirement from doing something that matters." Sarah had transitioned from shelter worker to foundation director, overseeing programs that had already reduced euthanasia rates across 3 counties. Her office wall displayed the framed Hatch Save Shadow poster from the courthouse rally, now signed by hundreds of supporters. "Elizabeth would be amazed," she told Mike during their monthly planning meeting. "One dog changed so many lives." Most surprising was Carter Wilson's transformation. His initial anonymous donations had evolved into regular volunteer work, first in administrative roles, then gradually working directly with abused animals. His expertise with financial systems had uncovered funding opportunities that expanded the Foundation's reach throughout Tennessee. "They respond differently to him," Dr. Reynolds observed privately to Mike. "The most traumatized animals. Perhaps they recognize something familiar in his energy, someone else rebuilding after damage." The 2 men maintained cautious distance, their interaction limited to necessary Foundation business. Yet Mike occasionally noticed Carter sitting alone with particularly fearful new rescues, speaking in low tones that seemed to address wounds beyond those visible. Mike's personal transformation unfolded in parallel with Shadow's. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but their frequency diminished. The crushing weight of guilt over Elizabeth's death and Jason's sacrifice gradually lightened, making room for new purpose. He'd sold his house, using the proceeds to eliminate remaining medical debt while establishing permanent residence in Eleanor's converted garage apartment, an arrangement that provided companionship for her and affordable housing for him. Shadow thrived in his role as therapy dog, formal certification confirming what Elizabeth had recognized long before. The dog's intelligence, once focused on survival, now channeled into helping others through trauma. His own scars remained visible, permanent reminders of resilience rather than victimhood. On Shadow's official adoption anniversary, Mike finally completed the task he'd long postponed, organizing Elizabeth's remaining possessions. Among medical records and sympathy cards, he discovered a journal devoted entirely to her search for the perfect companion dog. Visited the shelter again, she had written 3 months before her death. Ranger, the German shepherd, recognized me today, approached the kennel gate for the first time. The volunteer says he's never done that before. Something in his eyes, watchfulness, intelligence, and such profound sadness. He reminds me of Mike after Afghanistan, 2 wounded souls who might heal each other. Later entries detailed her arrangements with Sarah, training sessions between treatments, careful planning for a future she wouldn't witness. The final entry, dated 3 days before her hospitalization, simply read, "Sometimes love means preparing gifts others don't yet know they need. This will be my final gift to Mike, a guardian for when I can no longer stand beside him." Spring evenings in Nashville carried the scent of magnolia and promise. Mike and Shadow completed their circuit of Centennial Park as dusk gathered, returning to the bench where their story began. The dog's confident posture and bright gaze bore little resemblance to the terrified, emaciated creature from that rainy afternoon. Similarly, Mike's own bearing had transformed, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, grief not vanished but integrated rather than consuming. As they prepared to leave, Mike noticed an elderly man on the opposite bench, staring vacantly across the park, the distinctive 1,000-yard stare immediately recognizable. Shadow noticed too, ears forward, attention focused. Mike hesitated only briefly before approaching. "Mind if we join you for a minute?" The man, late 70s, Korean War veteran by his faded cap, looked up with the wary expression of someone unaccustomed to conversation. "Free country," he muttered. Shadow settled between them, head resting gently on the stranger's knee. The man's weathered hand moved automatically to the dog's fur, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Seems to like you," Mike observed. "Dogs always could spot a lost cause," the man replied, but his fingers continued their gentle motion through Shadow's coat. Mike smiled, recognizing the beginning of a journey he now knew well. "Funny thing about being lost," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's just the first step to being found." Life's most beautiful chapters often begin when we least expect them, sometimes after our deepest losses. Shadow and Mike's journey reminds us that healing happens in the giving of ourselves to others, whether they have 2 legs or 4. When Elizabeth prepared her final gift, she understood that purpose is the greatest medicine for a wounded heart. Many of us stand at similar crossroads, perhaps after retirement, loss of a loved one, or when the house grows quieter, wondering what comes next. The answer often lies in unexpected connections that transform our scars into wisdom we can share. Like Eleanor discovering her foundation at 72, or James finding renewal in his struggling pet shop, our greatest contributions may still await us. The most profound joy comes not from escaping our past wounds, but from using them to recognize and heal the pain in others. Has an unexpected companion, animal or human, ever changed the direction of your life when you needed it most? Or perhaps you've been someone else's shadow, appearing at just the right moment to guide them through darkness. We'd love to hear your story of connection and renewal in the comments below.